Chapter 34 is Chapter 5 of Part 6. Going to Jerusalem. It was about this time that the blessing of little children must have taken place. And we have reference to this in Matthew 19 and 20, Mark 10, and Luke 18. As the Passover approached, the people knew that the time of his departure for Jerusalem was drawing near. It reveals to us much of the character and behavior of Jesus during this trying and depressing period of his life, to learn that the mothers of the country were so impressed with his sanctity and benignity that they brought their young children, even their babes, to him, that he might merely put his hands upon them and pray over them. But the disciples were becoming rigorists. It is painful to see how rapidly men who at first take advanced ground become pioneers in moral progress and make themselves the differentia of their age, do begin to lapse into the blindest conservatism so soon that they consolidate their organization. Well, that's not the same thing quite, but conservationism do begin to have certain ideas of dignity, do suppose they are improving their state and position by as great a remove as possible from naturalness. It depends on your faith. In Islam, one's supposed to stay upon the natural way that God created us, the uprightness of our humanity. In this case, the disciples probably felt a fresh accession of dignity, as their master was manifestly about to make a public display of himself, and their hopes of a messianic inauguration probably began to be augmented. The disciples offered to forbid these mothers as obtrusive. It was below the dignity of their master. They had nothing to say when the Pharisees were holding him to the discussion of such profound and important questions as the divorce law. They felt that was employment worthy his noble character and mission, but that he should be asked to waste his time on babes seemed to them past endurance. So they rebuked these revering mothers. But Jesus, in turn, rebuked the disciples. He had other views and another temper. He was much displeased at the conduct of his friends. It was cutting him off from that portion of the community least offensive to his simple and pure nature. It showed upon their part such stubborn adherence to their prejudices in favor of a sensuous, civil, political messiahship. Such wrong views of the kingdom of the heavens as thought its insignia should be the trappings of worldly pomp, that Jesus was much displeased, and said to them, "Suffer the little children to come to me, and forbid them not, for such is the kingdom of the heavens. I most assuredly say to you, whosoever shall not receive the kingdom of God as a little child, he shall not enter into it." And having taken them in his arms, he blessed them, placing his hands upon them. The whole picture is simple, natural, beautiful, and sublime. The discourse on marriage, crimes stand as a dark background to this brilliant tableau of a great teacher lifting up infants into his arms, coming near the fountains of humanity, airing his soul in the free atmosphere of unsophisticated childhood. Well, it's just not as stark as one thinks, because you need a blend of things. You need condemnation, you need comfort, you need, It was an occasion seized to make a lesson for his disciples. They were thinking of a throne, a court, themselves as Hebrew princes in the regenerated theocracy, and that princes and their king should not be interrupted in their converse by the prattle of babes. Jesus taught them that he knew nothing of any such kingdom, that the kingdom of the heavens which he preached, and which was also the kingdom of God, was made up of such people, not of children merely, but not that the kingdom was theirs exclusively, but that no one could enter and enjoy that kingdom, which is as wide as all the heavens covering the universe, who did not have childlikeness of disposition, so that far from children having to grow into manhood in order to enter the fruition of God's kingdom. Remember, particularly in the Pauline side of the Bible, the best you can be is like a man, as a woman, but a man could be godlike. Yeah, it really says that, right? In order to enter the fruition of God's kingdom, it was absolutely essential that men should shed the hard shell of the rigid manhood and come back to the unsuspicious, open-eyed natural sensitiveness of childhood, and thus have the utmost enjoyment of all that God has made. Well, perhaps that's not it. Perhaps with all the discipline and all that other stuff, what you're really looking for is a willingness to learn and innocency. Because innocent and naive are totally different things. And Matthew 19, Mark 10, Luke 18. About this time, as he was on his journey out of the country, a certain ruler came running and kneeled to him and said, Good teacher, what good thing shall I do that I may inherit perpetual life? He seems suddenly to have felt the necessity of receiving the instructions of Jesus before he left the neighborhood. I'm having trouble with the page today. Jesus replied, Why do you call me good? No one is good but one, that is God. You know the commandments. Do not kill, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not bear false witness, defraud not, honor your father and your mother, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. He answered, Teacher, all these things have I observed from my youth up. Jesus looked on him and loved him, and then spoke the words that tested him. One thing is yet wanting to you. If you will be perfect, go sell whatever you have and give to the poor, and you shall have treasure in heaven. And come, follow me. He was very rich, and the saying sent him away very sorrowful. Now, one of the things that we can look at here is there's a page or two of illustration missing here. Now, if there's words on it or description that you know of that you want to share, perfect time to comment. This is a peculiarly interesting case as exhibiting a phase of human nature worth studying, as giving fresh insight into the character of Jesus. This person, who seems to have been a ruler of the synagogue, has led a life of scrupulous external morality, but failed to have quiet of spirit and satisfaction of soul. He had probably watched the course and studied the character of Jesus. He had occasional deep longings and high aspirations, but he did not have most thorough earnestness in the pursuit of the highest good, nay, had a kind of self-conceit and flippantness in talking of the most sacred things, both which came out of his address to Jesus. Good teacher, what must I do to inherit perpetual life? To which Jesus' reply seems to be a check, as if he had said, You seem to talk of goodness very lightly. Goodness is the loftiest thing. No one is absolutely good but God. Do you recognize God's goodness in me, or do you address me with an empty compliment, as he would not have himself called Messiah, in the wrong, or at least easily misinterpreted sense, in which the word was then often used? Well, to the Christian ear, it means, don't take the Messiah and Emmanuel and Christ thing literally. We mean it something different than some secondary figure set like any of the other prophets, which is pretty high exalted, leader of their community. But, neither would he have him in a mistaken way called good master. Neither would he have himself in a mistaken way called good master. Lang, The rabbis spoke too much of themselves, and honestly, he didn't want to be referred to in terms much like God, like Adonai. Not only was it a replacement, even if it wasn't a replacement word, it was sort of a word that really wasn't too much used for humans, like Mala or something in Arabic or Persian or something. He gives the young man, however, no space for reply, but proceeds to answer the question by directing him to the commandments of the moral law. The young man avowed that he had strictly kept all commandments all his life. All the commandments all his life, that he may have said with an accent of pride, but there was a painful tone in the question, "What yet do I lack?" which moved the compassion of Jesus. The young man may have unduly plumed himself upon his legal righteousness, but he was certainly candid. It was in kindness, then, not in severity, that Jesus, whose spiritual insight into men, even his enemies, must acknowledge, showed the young man the depth of his own heart and his lack of total earnestness. He was rich. Jesus submitted him to a violent test, namely the selling of all his property, its distribution to the poor, and the following